Good evening. I'm here to discuss with you today the trolley problem. I should have a blurb in the side there. To paraphrase the problem, you have a runaway trolley rolling down a specific set of tracks. A villain, some unknown evil philosopher, has placed 5 humans tied to the main line that the trolley is running down. You, however, are standing at the switch to a side track, where there is only 1 human tied to the tracks. It is then your duty to decide whether you should throw the switch, thereby sparing the 5 and killing the 1, or leave it as it is and allow the train to proceed down the main line and killing the 5, sparing the 1. If you do nothing, the 5 will die. If you throw the switch, only 1 will die. Which do you do? It's fairly straightforward, just a thought experiment, an attempt to determine what the moral ideal is, or at least that's what they say the problem is about. They say the problem is set up in order that you may discuss and come up with what the trend is, the considered moral best answer would be, ethically or morally or whatever means of measure you would use. And that the experiment is set up in order to determine that and thus be a gauge of society at any time at which the experiment might be discussed. There are several fundamental problems at work here, and they're not all obvious. The obvious answer, the utilitarian answer, and what would seem to be the most efficient, effective answer, is to throw the switch, spare the 5, thereby only killing or losing 1 person. They say that's the utilitarian answer, that would be the best. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Is that morally right or righteous? Is it ethically right? Can you defend that as an answer? That it is right, by whatever means you wish to choose to call it right. And more importantly, as per the problem, what is your answer? Would you follow that answer, the utilitarian answer? Now, we're not given any other information, so you don't know if it's 5 blacks and 1 white. You don't know if it's 5 females and 1 male, 5 children and 1 adult. You don't know if one of them is Einstein. You don't know if one of them is Martin Luther King. You don't know if one of them is Hitler. You don't know about all the prejudices that we might have for or against one set or the other. You don't have that in this equation, so you immediately have to disregard those factors. Now, in life, in reality, we know that we wouldn't. In reality, those would be the deciding factors. In reality, if we were really faced with this problem, most of us would decide very generously determined from our own set of judgmental, prejudicial, moralistic ideals. And they're not necessarily moral or necessarily correct or ideal, but it's the set that we live by. It's what we believe, our beliefs. And that would determine the outcome. That would determine what we would do. But I've got several things to suggest, and one of them is not the obvious answer at all. The one that I believe is not obvious, but what I believe completely, absolutely, 99.99999% of the people would do nothing at all. We would not act. It removes us from any sort of responsibility. We would not take that responsibility. And maybe rightly so. Even if you were a policeman or a judge or someone of power and strength and wisdom and knowledge, most people would not act. You would at least, at the very minimum, if you acted, be guilty of some sort of manslaughter. You would be guilty of causing the circumstance that killed the one person. You would be prosecutable, and likely, in most courts that I'm aware of, you would go to jail. You would do hard time. And obviously, the newspapers would try to defend you, and this lawyer or that judge or whoever would want to throw it out and try to get a retrial or appeal it to the Supreme Court or whatever. He saved 5 people, Your Honor. He's a hero. But he acted in a way which brought harm to one. Doesn't matter how many you save, if you bring the harm through your actions to that one person over not acting and not causing anything either way. Remember, you didn't set up the circumstance. So you didn't cause the 5 to die if they ended up dying. You just happened to be there and were able to change that outcome if you so chose to do so. And I'm saying that 99.9999% of us would not do a thing. And it's very much like a doctor who's at the scene of an accident who won't treat the people that are injured there because he's afraid of malpractice. Many doctors have been sued who gave treatment at the scene in an emergency sort of circumstance, and it could be shown either due to the bad treatment that they gave or due to something beyond the doctor's control. Something happened and the doctor was sued for negligence or bad treatment or whatever. Over and over and over again. So much so that happened. Doctors now refuse to treat people at the scene of the accident. They refuse to do it. And there's one other thing I'd like to bring out about the whole question. Is it moral to have this discussion? By presupposing this as a problem, are we attempting to fix someone's answer, thus remove their freedom of choice? If the occurrence occurred right after having this discussion, it's fresh in your mind, would you act as you said you would have acted, and thus would this discussion have prejudiced your actions, have predetermined your actions, have in some way influenced you or caused you to act in a certain way, thus removing your freedom of choice without having had this discussion, the freedom of choice you would have without being fixed to some answer that you feel like you have to support now that you've talked about it. Well, I guess I said I would do it, I guess I better go ahead and do it. And or if you were held to do it like children do. Children do this with parents. They try to trick parents into doing something by setting up the rules of the situation ahead of time. And then when the situation occurs, the parent is caught off guard and didn't realize all the implications that could occur in that situation, and they have to act against what they told the children they'd do. Oh, but you said we were going to go to the ice cream store. But I didn't know you would have just had ice cream for dessert at Grandma's. So we're not going to have 2 ice creams in one night. And you're then going to act on a situation that you have premeditated. And that's the other part of it I was going to get to. If it could be shown in any way that by your throwing the switch that saved 5 but killed the 1, that was a murderous act. Now, because you have had this discussion and thought about that circumstance, it's at least legally possible to consider it premeditated murder. That's premeditated. Now would you throw the switch?